What's up guys, and welcome back to another video. And in today's video we're going to be testing the R6. So I've had this camera for about a week. Haven't done any like major shoots with it. It's just kind of been cold, rainy, but today it's Saturday. I'm going to meet my friend at a local lumber shop, and then we're going to try to build a axe throwing target and throw some axes and kind of test out test out the high speed, the 4K 60, the 120, autofocus, all of that, kind of real world test it. And then in the end, after that, I will come back here, kind of wrap it all up, see how this thing did, and I'll give you my thoughts. So let's get going. Alright guys, that's it. That's the build process. We still got to put a target on this. We got some spray paint to do that. We're gonna do that up in the field because my truck's right here, and I don't want to spray paint a black truck matte black. So we're gonna do that up in the field. Honestly, I think it only took like an hour to build. Way easier than I thought. Alright, so we have a bit of a problem. This target, if you can see here, we're hitting the target, but the axes aren't sticking because instead of the grain going this way, it needs to go this way. So this whole thing, we now have to flip. Alright, so we're back in the studio. Today's Monday. I shot that Saturday, kind of worked through the footage and cut that edit that you just saw yesterday, and put together kind of my thoughts, the good, bad, and the ugly for this camera. And so I thought we would kind of just start at the bottom and work our way through. Good news, the ugly, there really isn't any. I mean, there's nothing about this camera that I absolutely hated and was like a deal breaker. It didn't overheat on me, it didn't shut down, it didn't have any like weird glitchy problems. I mean, it worked how you want a camera to work. So ugly, there isn't really any. All right, now on to bad. There's only really three things that stood out. The first is known issue, the IBIS wobble. So the IBIS wobble only really happens whenever you're on the very wide end of a 15 to 35. So when you're at that like 15, 20 millimeter mark, once you get to like 24 or 35, you don't really notice the wobble anymore. So that is good. But at the 15, there is definitely noticeable IBIS wobble. You can shut the IBIS system off. I didn't. Again, this is only my first ever shoot with it, so I'm kind of still learning how to shoot with it, seeing what scenarios that wobble happens and what doesn't. I also got to see if warp stabilizer could help, and in some cases it did, in others it kind of compounded and made the problem worse. Next is shutter angle. This is something Panasonic did with their S line of cameras, is they employed shutter angle. So you could set the shutter to 180 degrees in video mode, and then no matter what frame rate you're shooting at, it's always double the shutter speed of your frame rate. To my knowledge, Canon has never put this in any of their like mirrorless cameras, but it would be a very helpful addition, because when you're switching from 24 to 60 to 120, you always have to remember like what frame rate am I at, and what, you know, double my shutter speed, and then you switch to 120 real quick, you gotta double your shutter speed, and then you switch back to 24, and you gotta roll that shutter back down, change your ND. Having shutter angle would just kind of streamline that process a little bit. And last but not least is I just wish it had C-Log 3. C-Log is great. It's definitely not as a robust of a log profile as like S-Log 2 and S-Log 3 or C-Log 3 or V-Log. I know they announced the R5 is going to be getting C-Log in the future. They have not said anything about the R6, so fingers crossed the R6 does get C-Log 3. I think that's really the only three bad things. Is I wish it had shutter angle, I wish it had C-Log 3, and the IBIS wobble does happen on the very, very wide end of a 15 to 35. And now on to the good, and there's a lot of good. First and foremost is image quality, and the 4K 24 and the 4K 60 did not disappoint. I think that it's some of the best quality 4K coming out of a mirrorless camera to date, and that's coming from the S1, that's having used Sony's. Like, the 4K out of this camera is awesome. HD 120. I'm almost more surprised about the HD 120 than I was the 4K 60, because I kind of wrote it off at the beginning. You know, it's HD, it's pixel binned, it's high speed, so you're already always taking a hit in quality. But honestly, the HD 120 with autofocus still working, which is just awesome, worked amazing. And I thought the quality for being HD footage, still 10-bit, still have autofocus, and honestly it's a lot sharper and more usable than I thought it was going to be. Next up was the 10-bit footage. Some people said it's next to impossible to edit in their NLEs. Adobe Premiere, I have a custom built PC right there, so it's a 8-core, I think it's got 64 gigs of RAM and like a 1070 GTX, and I run the newest version of Premiere Pro. And at first I was editing, I thought I was gonna have to edit on proxies. I brought all the footage in, I conformed the 60 to 23, and I just started editing the 4K footage. And honestly, I never really needed proxies. It edited smoothly, color graded smoothly. I was able to push in, pull. I tried to keep the color grade very conservative, just to show you off like those Canon colors and not like put some crazy like heavy shift or hue or crunch to it to make it like cinematic. So I tried to keep it just very natural looking, and overall I was very happy with the footage. There was a lot of data. I could pull the highlights down, I could push the shadows up, I could drop the blacks, add contrast. I mean, the image never fell apart on me. So for that, A+, Canon's 10-bit is very good. Now on to autofocus, and it did pretty much exactly what I needed it to do. I ran it the entire time, so 100% of the shots were autofocus. I did no manual focusing in this. I really wanted to try, you know, pushing in, pulling out, doing dolly zooms, tracking subjects, and the autofocus just locked on, held on, and I could not be happier with how Canon's dual pixel autofocus worked in this shoot. I shot for about 6 hours, 80 gigs plus of footage, and the camera never overheated on me. It never even really got warm to the touch. And this was 4K 24, 4K 60, and HD 120 the entire time, autofocus the entire time. So the camera was definitely being worked. Never overheated. It was about 60 degrees ambient temperature, so it wasn't like it wasn't summertime heat, but it also wasn't like in the 30s. Never saw any warning, never really had any issue with that. The build, it is dust proof, which is good because I threw a lot of sawdust on this lens in those saw shots. So, I mean, this camera got coated in dust. I took it home, I blew it off. There was no dust inside the lens. There was no dust inside the camera body. I mean, when they said it's weatherproof and dust proof, it really is, and I put that to the test pretty much immediately. So you guys don't have to do that to your camera. I did it to mine. Ergonomics, the camera felt great. I mean, I didn't have any of that same issue, that like rubbing that I got with the S1. The entire time, camera felt just really solid. Love kind of the tilty screen. I mean, the quality is very good. I was shooting in sunlight. It was kind of cloudy at first, and then the sun came out. Didn't have any issues seeing the screen, so that's awesome. And then last and not least, but battery life was, I shot this entire thing, 6 hours of shooting on one battery, and that's awesome. So I had a second battery, never even needed to do it. Started at 100%, and by the time the shoot was over, I mean, the battery was dead, but it made it 6 hours of shooting. All of that footage was one battery, so the battery life is awesome on this thing. I left it on pretty much the whole time. I really wanted to see, is it gonna overheat? Is it going to drain the battery? Whatever Canon's doing is definitely working. So that's kind of my first impressions. Very good. Only a couple gripes, and that has to do with like shutter angle, which Canon has never done. C-Log, I wish it had C-Log 3, and I'm hoping Canon adds C-Log 3. And last but not least is the IBIS wobble, which is not a Canon thing, but just any lens that is on a stabilized body that's shooting super wide is going to wobble on the edges. It's just, there's really no way around it. So it's just, you kind of have to shoot around it. But so that was it. That's my first impressions. I hope you enjoyed like the short video. Hope you enjoyed some of our axe throwing, and hope you enjoyed the kind of my first impressions and look into the Canon R6. I'm definitely pumped to shoot with this camera more, and definitely be on the lookout. I'll probably be doing a lens review here in the future and a few more things with this camera, so definitely subscribe. Leave a comment down below if you want to know anything about the camera and the shoot and how it went, and I will see you guys in the next one.